finally finished the front guards on the Austin 7. I say finished, they're not completely finished, they still need a lot of hammering and smoothing out, but the general shape's there. And I've made the fill-in pieces that go between the guard and the body now. And they've come out okay. It was a bit fiddly actually. I found it a little bit tricky to actually get them to fit really nicely. And in some places the gap up here isn't exactly perfect, but there's going to be fender welt in there anyway. So I'm probably going to have a strip of that in between the guard and the fill-in piece all the way down, and there'll definitely be something between the guard and the body, mainly to stop everything rattling and also to separate the aluminium from the steel. That'll follow all the way down and all the way around. It's going to be a bit tricky to see, but I did reinforce these brackets. I sort of welded in a little angle piece there, and that's just made everything completely rigid. That's worked really well. I did take the car up and down the driveway a few times. I was also testing the brakes. The brakes work pretty well. I haven't been able to lock up the wheels, even though it's all wet. But you have to stomp on them very hard, but the car stops pretty quickly. Obviously, I'm not going very fast because it's not a very long driveway, but it definitely doesn't seem to pull one side or the other, and it pulls the car up pretty well. I'll have to test it out on some wet grass or some gravel or something somewhere, and I've got a few places picked out for that already when I get it on the road. I live on a peninsula and you can drive all the way around it, and there's a few places there where there are some sort of gravel off-road, off the side of the road places where I'm sure I can do a little bit of experimentation and make sure the brakes are set up correctly and balanced. But I think the guards look pretty good. I'll see if I can take some film outside. Like I say, it's raining and I don't want to get it wet because a lot of this is just all unprotected steel at the moment. It's a bit hard to get a view of it from in here because you can't really get far enough back. But I'm pretty pleased with how it's come out. Like I say, it's not perfect. I'm sure if you measure things, stuff isn't straight, but it's an asymmetrical car, so nothing's straight anyway. One thing I did notice is I was trying to keep the seam along here very straight because that should be a straight line. And I discovered there's a gap here because it turns out this panel isn't exactly straight, and it's because the firewall pulls in very slightly there. We're only talking about 3/16 of an inch, but that's a little bit annoying that it's nice and tight all the way up along there and then a little bit loose there. But again, I think the fender welt will hide a lot of sins, hopefully. This will need a little bit of filler in places as well. I made this as a separate section, so that's welded on. It's fairly smooth, but skim of filler over there. I've left little holes at the end of that piece. So obviously, if you're driving this in the rain, in the wet, this is just going to catch water. It's like a big gutter. So there'll be a hole there that all the water can drain out. And the same, there'll be a little hole in that little back corner there, a little gap where the water can drain through. But overall, I think that looks pretty good. Definitely looks a lot different to most Austin 7 specials you see around, so that's good. Definitely doesn't look like an Ulster, which is good because I don't really like those. So next thing will be, I still have to do all the fiddly straps and bits and pieces, but at the rear I need to figure out where the rear lights are going to go. Probably need little reflectors on the back here as well. The number plate's going to have to mount somewhere. It's going to be a little bit awkward. I'm not sure exactly where I can put that. At the front, obviously it'll be headlights and possibly the little side lights. I need to check. I think I've got some side lights, and I've kind of left this here as a hole with a bolt through it because I may be able to actually mount the side lights there, so I don't need the bolt to tie it to that bracket. The lights will do that. The bulk of the wiring is all in there. I just need to wire the little bits and pieces that come out to the headlights and the tail lights and the side lights. But I can't really get back far enough. I think it looks okay. And since we're here, an update on the Riley. I've got in touch with a spring maker who has done work with vintage cars before, old cars, down in Dunedin. So I'll probably send the springs down to them. He seemed to know exactly what I was talking about and seemed quite happy to help. So I need to calculate what the amount of arch I need in the springs are. So these front springs will need some leaves removed. There's 7 on here at the moment. A Brooklands needs 6 at the front. And I also need it modified because on this one, the top 2 leaves both wrap around this rear eye. And that makes it too fat to fit in the shackle. So this shackle's actually backwards. That should be on this side. And the way these springs need to be set up on the Brooklands is so that when the car is loaded, these are effectively flat. It'll be straight across here because the car is so low. So what I need to do is calculate the amount of camber that needs to go in the spring so that when it's loaded up, it'll sit flat. It's a little bit tricky trying to work that out, but I should be able to get it close enough. And one of the things I need to know or need to work out is what the weight distribution of the car is so I can figure out how much weight is over the front springs. I know the entire car is about 800 kg when finished. So for now, I'm going to assume a 50-50 distribution. So there's about 400 kg on the front springs. I'll use that for my calculations and see what numbers I get. The rear springs are going to need a little bit more work. These are currently 10 leaf springs, so these will definitely need some leaves removed. I believe these should be 6 as well. And you can see these are both Riley springs, but they're different. So the top leaf is a different thickness on each of these. So what I'm going to need to do is have these rebuilt with the right sort of arch, which it may actually be pretty close as it is. And I will get the top leaf remade with the right eyes on the end. On these Riley springs, you can see one eye bends down and the other one bends up. So again, I'll do the same calculation on the rear to figure out how much camber needs to be in them when static so that they'll sit more or less flat when the car is loaded and on the ground. One measurement I need to get that I haven't got is the rear spring goes from a pin that goes through this bar, and there's a mounting point on the chassis somewhere here, which I don't have. I can make that. I need to figure out where exactly that mounting point is. So I need the measurement from the center of that pin to the center of the pin at the rear. And then there's just a shackle. So that'll sit like that, and the spring hangs from it. So they're kind of, it's almost like they're upside down, if that makes sense. So the rear sits like that, and the same at the back. That sits in there, and the spring hangs between those two. They definitely go that way up, which is why the little oil cup is on the top there. So that'll be one job to do. I still haven't done anything with the steering wheel. The other thing I did today is collected my axle, front axle, which has had the hole here in the axle eye, which was bell mouthed and oversized. That's been sleeved with a hardened sleeve, and this is now the correct. It's quite tight, hand fit in there, and there's no movement on that. So what I can do now is assemble the stub axles on there, hopefully. I just need to make sure I've got the right endfloat in here, which is something I'd set up before, so that should all be correct. And of course it goes that way up. You can see on the Riley that bottom bush is blind, which is why the kingpin has this threaded piece in the top. One, so you can get you could put a grease nipple in there, but that's actually done on the top of the stub axle here. There's a cap that goes on there with a grease nipple on it. So this thread is actually for a bolt, so you can remove these things. Because with the blind bush in the bottom, there's no way to hammer this up from the bottom. You have to sort of pull it from the top. And that's what that thread's for. The other thing to note with these Riley stub axles is on the lower edge here, there is a hardened thrust washer, and there's a pin there, and this should fit on there like that. So when you put the stub axle in, you have to remember to put that in place as well. So that went together fairly easily. It all just kind of slotted together. I did sort of spray everything with a little bit of WD-40 just to lubricate it, make it a bit easier. The last thing to do is there's a hole through the middle of the stub axle here, and when this is all assembled, that lines up with this little flat on the kingpin, and there is a tapered cotter pin that goes through, and that's what locks it all in place. So that pin goes through into there, and then you hammer it home. It's already locked itself in place, so it's a tight fit. I'd have to tap that out. This is the one for the other side. These are a little bit different to the Austin 7. So the Austin 7, there's a bit of a trick, which is the kingpin, instead of a flat, has a sort of half moon shape on it, and it uses a pin that has a half moon shape. So when you assemble the Austin 7 front axle, you have to put the little pin through, line up the half moons so you can get the kingpin in, and then there's a nut on the end of the pin. And when you tighten that nut, it sort of pulls it in and it locks it all together. The trick with those is a lot of people, if they've never seen it before, probably assume it's a pin like this, just with a taper on it, and they'll undo the nut and then try and hammer the pin out. But there's no way it'll come out with the kingpin in place because of those two half circles sort of interlocking. This one's a bit easier. You would just hammer the pin out. So I'm probably not going to hammer the pins in tight for now, just in case I end up having to take all this apart again because I've forgotten something. But that's on there now. That moves nicely, and there's no play. So it's got the correct up and down end float, and there's no wobble to it at all. I could set it up with the DTI and see what there is actually there, but that feels pretty good. I have the stub axles now attached to the axle beam. They rotate really well, nice and smooth, no movement. I've got the cap on the top there. These just unscrew. That one's a bit tight at the moment. I think there's meant to be a little piece of felt that goes in the top there, which I'm missing, but I'm sure I can make something for that. The arms that actuate the steering get bolted on here. So this one, for example, will get bolted onto there. There's special bolts that hold these on, which I do have. and this top eye is where the drag link from the steering box attaches onto there, so that works above the axle. And then this lower eye is what goes across the car to the other side, and there's a little bracket that goes on there like that, and those are attached with this what's this one called, the tie rod. And this has the ball ends that screw in the end there, which I've cleaned up, but I need to get new little taper pins for. And I have just temporarily lined up one of the brake backing plates, so this goes on the back of the wheel, obviously, and the brake drum fits in there. These are nice cast aluminium pieces, and they are handed, so I'm not actually sure which side goes where at the moment, but this is just to show how they sort of fit onto the end of the stub axle there, and then that rotates. So that's another little job done. One thing worth mentioning is on vintage cars like this, often a lot of people polish everything up, get everything really shiny, probably shinier than they ever were from the factory. I want a car that I can use and drive around and not have to worry about too much, that it gets scratches or dings or doesn't look perfect. I want a usable car. So, for example, with these cast brake backing plates, I've just cleaned them up. I just wire brush them with a brass brush and the drill, and then I usually just go over them with this sort of Scotch pad stuff, and just sort of rub over them, and that just cleans them up and gives them a dull, natural aluminium finish. It just takes away all the shiny marks. I'm not sure you can really see, but you can see the wire brush marks there. This just evens them all out, makes it nice and clean, and just a nice sort of dull finish. But I think that looks a lot better than overly shiny and polished.